Hello, and thank you for joining us. Today's webinar is Fusion, a tool for 21 CFR 11 compliance. Our presentation today will be by Joy Osborne, our TOC Technical Product Manager for Teledyne Tekmar. We will be answering questions at the end of the webinar, so feel free to submit the questions throughout the presentation. Okay, Joy, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Shelley. Up front, I want to let you know that I'm not a compliance expert. Recently, there has been a surge of interest into the topic of pharmaceutical compliance. And as a product specialist, I've been trying to learn as much as possible about it to help our customers, hence creating this webinar. The webinar will mainly focus on utilizing the Fusion as a tool for 21 CFR 11 compliance. Please note the responsibility to be compliant is ultimately up to the lab or company working with a compliance officer. All right, here is our agenda. There will be a brief overview of 21 CFR 11 compliance, but I implore you to read the full document outside of this webinar. This webinar is from our perspective, meaning the chemical instrumentation manufacturer, not a lab or company trying to be compliant. Next, our interpretation, meaning Teledyne Tekmar's interpretation of 21 CFR 11 compliance, which is continuously evolving and improving as technology does. Finally, an in-depth view of Fusion compliant software tools. These software tools are built into the Fusion TechLink software to make it easier on the lab to be 21 CFR 11 compliant. Let's discuss a brief overview of 21 CFR 11 compliance. 21 CFR 11 became effective in 1997. It hasn't changed much in the way it's written, but the interpretation has changed as technology has changed, especially when it comes to the definition of data integrity. It stands for the Code of Federal Regulations, Part 11 of Title 21, which is entitled Electronic Records, Electronic Signatures. It breaks it up into three subparts: general provisions, electronic records, and electronic signatures. The FDA mandates that the electronic records must be trustworthy and reliable, meaning there's no loss or corruption of data files. For electronic signatures, they must be used only by one individual, and they should be as binding as a handwritten signature. This 21 CFR 11 applies to all FDA industries, including food, drug, cosmetic, and personal care. There are similar pharmaceutical compliance guidelines across the world. So this one is, for the United States, but a lot of other countries still follow FDA guidelines and 21 CFR 11. But other countries have their own version of it, but it does appear to be very similar, but I implore you to read that too. An example of that is European Union's Chapter 4, which talks about the same things, electronic signatures and electronic records and things like that. All right, so now it's time to go into Teledyne Tekmar's interpretation of 21 CFR 11 compliance. Okay, so I get the question all the time as the technical product manager, is the Fusion software 21 CFR 11 compliant? And one word, no, it's not. However, it can be a tool for compliance. Being compliant is the responsibility of the FDA compliant company and not the software's responsibility. Argumentatively, no software is 100% compliant, meaning the user, whoever's using the Fusion software has to use and maintain it correctly for compliance to happen. To be a compliant for a lab, it typically involves lab personnel, IT specialists, that can lock down data files, back them up, all that kind of stuff, and document standard operating procedures, documented workflows, and an FDA compliance officer, all working together as a team. The software tools for compliance are only as good as the team around them making them effective. There's been a lot of evolution when it comes to the meaning of data integrity. Even though 21 CFR 11 has not changed much since 1997. Can you imagine how much computers have changed since 1997? So as operating systems have evolved, so typically for this industry, it means Windows. Security expectations of first 21 CFR 11 compliance has also evolved. So for an example, today's default Windows user, so we'll say most users now have Windows 10, some still have Windows 7, is now restricted from program files, so you can't get to those program files, which was changed after Windows XP. So Windows XP, everyone could get into those program files, but now they're restricted. So now I'm excited to talk about all the compliance features the Fusion software has built in to make it easier for the user to be compliant. So here's a picture of our Fusion. So a little bit about the Fusion before I go into all the features that it has, just in case you don't have one already. It is a UV Persulfate TOC analyzer. So it uses UV light, which comes from a lamp, and sodium persulfate, which is a chemical oxidizer, to oxidize that organic carbon to CO2, which is then read by the DIR detector. I would say majority of the market right now is either combustion or conductivity, but this technique for oxidation is really, really good at doing low-level analysis. We're talking parts per billion, which is very applicable to the pharmaceutical industry, things like that. And that is because with the UV persulfate oxidation reaction, you don't get as much background carbon that catalytic combustion gives you. So it's really difficult to do really low-end parts per billion analysis on catalytic combustion, but it's much easier to do with UV persulfate for that reason. It also has a lot less interference than conductivity. There's a lot of things that can interfere with conductivity. It will change the conductivity of the sample, but it may not actually be a reflection of how much organic carbon is in it. So there's a lot of different compounds, chlorides, things like that, that will actually give you a false flow. So you might think my water is clean enough when it in fact is not. Things like that you want to keep in mind. Applications. So the Fusion is really great for clean in place validation. So that's the swabbing technique where you take whatever equipment you use to manufacture one of those products from the food, drug, or cosmetic industry. So vessel, things like that. You'll take that and you'll swab it to make sure it's clean. So that's going to check with TOC for any residual soaps, any residual compounds from the previous batch, anything like that, bacteria, foreign objects, all that would fall under TOC. So it's a good catch-all method to make sure that equipment is clean for the next batch. It's also great for water for injection and purified water. So that's the water used to make those products. So making sure that you aren't contaminating those products by using bad water that could be dangerous to the end user. The pharmaceutical methods it's good for is high purity water, cleaning validation, USP 643, so United States Pharmacopoeia 643, European Pharmacopoeia 2.244, Japanese Pharmacopoeia 16 2.59. All right. So we try to integrate a lot of different features into the TechLink, Fusion TechLink software. And I kind of categorized them into different categories that I got from reading 21 CFR 11. So they want you to be able to validate that it's working properly, so that the Fusion is actually working properly, analytically, mechanically, all those things. Then you have user identification, authentication. So, proof that you are the user, you are the one running the sample, you are the one creating the method, all that kind of stuff. It will track that. User access control. So different users will have different permissions to do certain things within the software. Traceability and audit trail. So if there's, ever a recall or you get audited, and you have to, show records, of at least a year or whatever it is, you can go back and pull up that data in its original form. It'll be unaltered, untainted, anything like that. And data integrity, which is what we've been talking about, just making sure when you back up files or move them from, a local drive to a network drive, things like that, you don't lose any information in the process. It doesn't become corrupted. You're not missing anything. It is retained exactly the way it was when it was run. And then electronic signature. So in the Fusion software, you can also sign off on reports. You can do it as many times as you want. So if you want to have the user run it, then their supervisor sign off of it, and then your supervisor sign off on it. You can't do that inside the software. Okay. So let's talk about this, about what I all just talked about and what that actually means in the software specifically. So again, I try to group them into categories. Some of them kind of overlap with different categories. This one's pretty straightforward, that it's a validation thing. So with USP 643 and EP 2.244, you take two different types of compounds, sucrose and 1,4-benzoquinone, and you ratio them together to make sure they oxidize at the same rate. So sucrose is a very easy to oxidize compound. It's easy to break up those bonds, those organic carbon bonds, and create CO2. While 1,4-benzoquinone is a difficult to oxidize compound, meaning it's a lot harder to break up those bonds and convert them into CO2. So if you run them both at 0.5 ppm carbon concentrations, which you can calculate from chemical formula, they should come out within 15%. That percentage is mandated by those methods of each other. So they should come out within 15% of each other, and then they should also be within 15% accuracy. So that for 0.5 ppm would be 0.425 to 0.575 ppm. So the software has this already built in where it calculates it for you, and it can tell you if these things pass or fail. So it can tell you right away if your system's not running properly, and it can actually even halt on a failure. So if these results did not come out right, you can have it stop the schedule, so it won't proceed to your next samples. I have a whole webinar out there on USP 643, so if you're running that method, I would definitely recommend to check it out. It is on YouTube and it's on our website if you want more information. The example on the screen is a snip from an application note. So it's just showing, your sucrose, which is half a ppm, and your 1,4-benzoquinone is half a ppm. Comparing the results, they're actually 100, if you put them together, they're almost 100%. And then your reagent water must be less than 100 ppb, which is showing 19.5 ppb, so much lower. It was also run in triplicate, and you can see the RSCs are very low, so they're less than 1%. They're a bit higher for the reagent water, and that's just because you're ratioing a very low number to a very low number. Okay. All right, so another thing we offer for validation, and this is offered by our service team, our field service engineers. We can come on site and do an IQ, OQ, PQ validation. So we'll do your installation qualification, your operational qualification, your performance qualification, and go through that with you. You can also do it on your own. You can write up your own SOP for this, but if you want help, we do offer that as a tool to help you be compliant. So for your IQ, we just ensure that installation of Fusion is in accordance with the manufacturing design recommendations for its intended use, as well as current good manufacturing practices and principles. So we're just going to make sure everything's installed correctly, including your nitrogen gas supply, all that kind of stuff. Operational qualification. So then you're going to validate that it operates correctly as a low-level TOC analyzer system for pharmaceutical and drinking water analysis. So we'll check things like flow rate and benchmarking and all that kind of stuff. And then you have your performance qualification, which confirms the Fusion meets the performance criteria, validating that it is effective and reproducible as a TOC analyzer system for pharmaceutical or drinking water analysis. So examples of that are like a limit of detection study, carryover or cross-contamination, system suitability, user permissions, restrictions, archiving, data archiving, and more. All right, so let's go into a couple different other categories of the user identification, authentication, the traceability, and audit trail. The software is able to identify who is interacting through logging in. So it's basically just like when you log into your work computer or your personal computer, you have a username and your password. Only you should have this password, okay? So it's unique to you and only you. So even the administrator who sets up each user will not have your password, okay? So it's important that, you know, you don't lose your password, that kind of stuff. But, you know, you can log in just like Windows. So every time you do anything in this username, it will stamp it. So that means anything inside the software you do, if you change a method, you change a schedule, you change a report, you do anything, it will stamp it with your username and the date and time, and it will rev it. So then the older versions of that are never deleted. And that's on purpose for audit trails and things like that. So here's a picture of a report. So this is at the top of the report. This is something I ran back on November 29, 2017. It gives me the date, the time, the schedule name, the instrument name, the report version. So if you do different report versions, like changing your calibration curve and then recalculating it, it will rev it, things like that. And then the operator, which is just Fusion, and it's a version 3 of that operator. And all that information is already logged into the report at the top and the bottom. I'll show you the bottom in a little bit. So that's all part of being a tool of 21 CFR 11 compliance. Here's the method. So here's a method I created. It also gives you the date and time, who did it. So that was me. Do you want to delete the old on next archive? No. And there's only one version. So you can have, like, you know, 12 versions of the same method, like TOC wastewater, but it will rev it every time, and you can still access those older versions. So if you think something's accidentally gotten changed over time, you can actually track it by the rev. Here's a schedule. So every time you open a schedule or save it, so if you change your schedule chronologically or something like that, or add more check standards to it, it will actually tell you who did it. It will ask for a change justification, which is a pop-up window that says, why are you doing this, basically, and you can put the reason why. That's all being part of a tool for 21 CFR 11 compliance. To be honest, I haven't been using it because I honestly don't work for an FDA compliant lab, but if I did, I would put why I changed the schedule, and it will, you know, better method or whatever it is in there. So it's always tracked and documented. All right, and then let's talk about user access control. So only administrators can add other users. So if you log in as an administrator and put in the administrator password, you can add as many users as you want. So usually they're different lab personnel, different people on the lab team, and you'll put each name, and then you will make the user must change the password at next login. So that way the administrator doesn't know the password. Now, because of this, the administrator, if you log in as the administrator, you cannot run the Fusion. So it's kind of a check and balance of the person who is setting up users cannot run the Fusion themselves. So if an IT person sets up the users, and then, you know, a user can't add another user that has all the permissions. Maybe they don't want that person to have all the permissions. It can't happen. And then with each user that you set up, you can actually enable or disable what they're allowed to do. Like if you don't want them to edit methods, you know, maybe they're an intern or a co-op and you just don't want it to accidentally happen that they can edit methods, you would unclick this and they're no longer able to do that. So you can go through this list and figure out what you think each user should have the ability to do. All right. So method tracking in each report. So with every Fusion report at the bottom, it actually gives the method of what was run with that data. Like I said, it will rev every time you save over a method, it will create a new version. So this one's on version 7, so you can go back to older versions. It will track which version you ran it on. So let's say you ran a report on version 3 of this 643 pharma method, but it's different, sample volume 6 mils instead of 4.5. You know, things like that, you can track it. You know, you won't lose that information ever. So it gives you exactly what was run, all the method parameters, it dates and timestamps, and it even tells you who did it. Unfortunately, this was just a default Fusion, but it could have said Joy or somebody else that's in the lab. All right, let's talk about data integrity. So one thing is backing up your data when you're talking about data integrity. So there is an auto archiving feature with the Fusion. So in order to get to that, you just go to Tools, System Properties, and then you click the Archive tab. So here's the box that pops up. You're going to browse for where you want it to go. Usually, you know, some labs like to put it to a network folder so that it's backed up with their local IT policies. And then you're going to click Archiving, and you can archive as much as you want. You can do every day, once a month, whatever your SOP calls for, what time you want it to archive. And then after each archive, if you want to delete the previous archive, you can do that. Again, maybe you only want to keep so much to the local drive, so you move that over to something with more space, and then you delete that, and then, you know, that kind of stuff. You can also just manually archive by clicking Begin Archive. And every time you archive, it is, you know, date and time stamp by who did it, all that kind of stuff. All right, let's talk about CSV export. So I get this question a lot. Can the Fusion export and import from a LIMS type system? Yes. So the export, you do have to go to Tools, System Properties, CSV Export tab, okay? And then you have to tell it basically which columns in that CSV file you want to export. So you have to go through each tab and figure out which ones you want. Do you want the ppm? Do you want the RSD? Like, what do you want to go into your LIMS system? You can have everything go in if you want. So that's another way you can back up data, because then it's saved to a different system besides just TechLink. And this will automatically happen after you're done. The import part, we have an extra tool that you can get on our website that just import sample IDs. That way you don't have to worry about mistyping them in, or, you know, doing something like that wrong. You can actually import the sample IDs, and then you don't have to worry about human error when it comes to that. And that is just a free courtesy tool on our website. All right, electronic signatures. All right, so to do that, this one's a little more complicated. So be patient with me. Actually, I might actually just pull up the Fusion software for this one. Hold on just a second. All right. So to do electronic signatures, here's an example report I have. You know, I just ran a clean, a couple cleans, a blank, calibration curve. Okay. So to sign off on this, you would go to the Interactive tab, and then the electronic signature button. Sorry, the pop-up window popped up in my other screen. So this window will pop up, and you'll click Sign Report. And then this window will pop up, and you can put Approved, Rejected, or just Reviewed. And I'll put and then it'll click sign, and then it will actually ask me to log in. So that's kind of making sure it's just like a not login, sorry, it's checking my credentials. So this is ensuring that it is me that's actually doing it, or who is actually signing off on it. So then you would put in your password, and then it would show up on the report as approved at the bottom. Okay? And if there's anything in the software you want me to show you at the end of the call, instead of just on a PowerPoint, just let me know by typing in the box if that is easier to see than just putting it on the screen. So here's a picture of, it will say under acceptance, approval, reviewed and approved by Joy, and then it will be date and time stamped. And you can have as many people as you want sign off on that report. All right. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the future of FDA compliance. I've noticed recently, like I said in the beginning of this webinar, that I've noticed far more inquiries into this topic. So again, the actual 21 CFR 11 compliance hasn't really changed. So it's more that we're more conscientious of these type of things. And I've also noticed that there are several pharmaceutical regulating bodies that are trying to work together to do a global harmonization system for drug compliance. I haven't seen anything that's become effective yet, and I know some of these regulating bodies have been working for many decades on doing this, but I also remember back when I was in college, we talked about doing a global harmonization system of material safety data sheets. And, you know, we all kind of laughed at, oh, we'll never agree upon, you know, what should be on a material safety data sheet from country to country. But we eventually did, and I believe back in 2014 or 2015, OSHA adopted that. So now it's SDSs, and there's a regulated format which you ship different chemicals. So it can happen. And as the pharmaceutical world becomes more globalized, you know, a lot of our drugs are coming from India and Southeast Asia right now. It would be good to know that they're following strict guidelines that are the same or equal to the ones that the FDA has. So I'm kind of on the lookout for that. If anybody else, you know, has any more information, I'm always looking for more, you know, so I can help provide more tools for the user so you guys can be compliant. So if you have any more updates that are coming down that you're worried about your chemical instrumentation not being compliant towards, I'd love to see those so we can, you know, help work you through that process so you can be compliant with your next audit. And then this is just a little fun thing I added. You just never know how they're going to make you identify yourself in the future. Right now, you know, password is okay, but, you know, maybe 10 years from now, you know, they're only going to accept fingerprints or eye scans or things like that. And we're going to actually, you know, have to find a way to add that to the software, or either add that to the way you log into the computer. So again, it's hard to say where it falls sometimes, if it falls more on your local IT, trying to make sure those things are happening, or is it a little bit, you know, our responsibility to make sure that you have all the tools to be compliant if you really need to go that far with your chemical instrumentation software. So that's more of a discussion or a thought I wanted to leave you with. Since we have noticed some more interest, we actually added another tool to help you guys out. Again, we're always trying to improve things for our customers. So we created this tool. It's a little software tool called TT Run As, which is Teledyne Tekmar Run As. And it's a program that provides a way to run TechLink as a specific user with write privileges to TechLink files. TechLink files that are locked down to the user can no longer be accessed outside of TechLink. Okay? It requires manual lockdown of these files for this master user. And if you want this tool to help you out, you can contact our technical support for a copy, which is 1-800 874-2004, and that is free or courtesy to any of our existing customers, okay? And really all I looked into was the FDA for this presentation. I really wanted to know what the FDA wanted out of this. So all my stuff comes from FDA. And does anybody have any questions or concerns or something they want to see live in the software?